So it was with the hope of breaking down or at least lowering somewhat this wall of prejudice that I undertook the writing of this book and delved into the long, complex, but fascinating history of the distorted images and biased perceptions Westerners have accumulated on Russia in the course of centuries, and more precisely, since Charlemagne broke away from Byzantium. The insane extent of Russophobia today, the Russo madness that seems to have caught hold of Western chancelleries and newsrooms, is not an inevitability, but reflects a conscious choice. This is what the present work intends to demonstrate, a work which in fact has but one ambition: convincing readers that there is no need to hate Russia. Let us specify as well, but isn't it obvious, that this book in no way proceeds from any anti-Western sentiment? Exposing what drives the hatred of Russia does not imply discarding the values of democracy, freedom, and human rights that the West has been promoting ever since the French Revolution. And neither does it mean swooning over President Putin's Russia. Criticizing the West's most dubious attitudes is not exonerating Russia of her faults. My approach thus has nothing to do with an anti-American or anti-European pamphlet, which would reproduce, only topsy-turvy, the binary vision the media loves so much, and which would consist in opposing a good but persecuted Russia to a nasty West. What is at stake is simply to restore Western-Russian relations in their truth and complexity, and thereby to do right by the dozens of millions of Russians who have been trying in the last 25 years to build a chosen, not an imported democracy, to rebuild an economy devastated by privatizations, and to forge a clean future, not imposed from outside. Finally, if this book is at times very critical of the media, it does not put journalism in the dock. In all editorial offices in the world, there are many journalists who endeavor to do a good job, but they are assailed by the feeling of their own fragility, of their vulnerability when faced by editors-in-chief who no longer defend them against the pressures of lobbies, of the economic world, and of political leaders. At the present time, journalists are paralyzed by the fear of losing their jobs. They no longer feel they have enough strength to resist the pressures of what is presumed to be politically correct and the demands of the central desk to angle their topics according to ambient prejudice and sweet invitations of prevailing pressure groups. Time and autonomy being short, they yield to force of habit, to the comforting feeling of melting into the mainstream. Just like the politicians for whom being right alone is suicidal, while being wrong in droves is life insurance. If this book, by showing the weight of prejudice inherited from history, can also contribute to putting a stop to this latent war, to the thousand-year ostracism that undermines the West from the inside by amputating a large part of itself, then it will have achieved its goal. When it looks at itself in the mirror, the West should at last understand that it does not extend only from the United States to the European Union, nor even to the Urals according to General de Gaulle's formula, but that it does indeed stretch through Europe to the Pacific Ocean, or, as George H.W. Bush put it, from Vancouver to Vladivostok. I composed this book in 3 parts. The first shows the strength of the Russophobic prejudice in the West through a series of examples. The first chapter endeavors to define the phenomenon of Russophobia, and the next chapter details its progress during events taken from recent news: the Ubelingen mid-air collision, the Beslan hostage-taking, the Ossetia War, and the Sochi Olympics. The third chapter shows how, concerning the crisis in Ukraine, the media gave up on reporting the facts, asking questions, and expressing points of view that did not fit with the official version. The second part presents the historical, religious, ideological, and geopolitical origins that underlie the detestation of Russia through 5 different forms of Russophobia. It retraces the genealogy of Russophobia in the various European nations over 13 centuries since Charlemagne competed with Byzantium for the title of heir to the Roman Empire. From the religious and imperial rivalry created by Charlemagne and the papacy, to the genesis of French, English, German, and then American Russophobia, the West has engaged in more or less violent hostilities for 1,000 years against Russia, with the latter reciprocating, let's be fair. The third part, cognitive manipulation, describes the workings of contemporary Russophobia, the construction of an anti-Russian discourse in the media, and the diplomatic world, and the fabrication and demonization of the bad guy, a role at present bestowed on Vladimir Putin. Both discourse and fabrication feature in the meta-narrative, the mythical framework of the ferocious Russian bear ruled with a rod of iron by its vicious president. A synthetic reading of all these elements is presented in the light of recent events, in particular of the Ukrainian crisis, showing how all the resources of the West's soft power have been mobilized to impose the tale of bad Russia dreaming of devouring pure, innocent Europe. The conclusion shows that this negative discourse on Russian otherness is part and parcel of a never-accomplished Western identity. Europe, in crisis and divided, needs the Russian foe to achieve unity. Like in the famous Snow White fairy tale, the West is like the evil stepmother who keeps questioning its mirror to reassure itself of its primacy. But the Russian mirror is resisting, and always can show that the West is not the most beautiful in the world, and that in the East, very far away in the East, there is a country that is at least as pretty. In a parody mode, a vision thus gradually takes shape, at once ironical and synthetic, of the deeply ambivalent relations binding Europe to Russia and vice versa. In fact, Russophobia, contrary to French Anglophobia and Germanophobia, is a phenomenon that, though different of course, resembles anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. Like anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, it is not a transitory phenomenon linked to specific historical events. It exists first in the head of the one who looks, not in the victim's alleged behavior or characteristics. Like anti-Semitism, Russophobia is a way of turning specific pseudo-facts into essential, one-dimensional values: barbarity, despotism, and expansionism in the Russian case, in order to justify stigmatization and ostracism. Russophobia also possesses a religious foundation and is not limited in time. It has spread over centuries, reappearing endlessly whenever chance circumstances allow. It passes away here to be reborn there, fades away for generations before being resurgent for some geopolitical reason, and sometimes it disappears entirely to be replaced by unexpected sympathy and admiration. Then, seemingly thanks to a new incident, a misinterpreted intention, a tactless declaration, a new urban legend, or a border conflict, it flares up all over again. In fine, as for anti-Semitism, anti-Islamism, and anti-Americanism, Russophobia possesses an undeniable geopolitical component. Multifaceted, transcultural, protean, multi-ethnic, transhistorical, Russophobia is, however, always linked to the Catholic or Protestant Northern Hemisphere. The peoples of Asia, Africa, or South America have never been Russophobes. The Chinese and the Japanese have border problems with Russia over which they sometimes went to war, but they are not Russophobic and have never come up with any discourse of this type.